As I mentioned earlier, the end product of glycolysis is the pyruvate molecule, which could have different possible fates, while the first possibility is to go into the citric acid cycle. But before that, it has first to be converted into an acetyl coenzyme A. But there is one problem because pyruvate is produced in the cytoplasm, which is where your glycolysis is, while the citric acid cycle happens right in the mitochondria. In other words, pyruvate will first has to be transported into the matrix of the mitochondria by a surface protein. So upon arrival, pyruvate, which is 3-carbon, will be decarboxylated to produce a 2-carbon acetyl coenzyme A, and it is the first substrate for the citric acid cycle. And this reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. So from 3-carbon to 2-carbon means that 1 carbon dioxide is being removed. And this reaction is also known as an oxidative decarboxylation. So why is it oxidative? Because you have the removal of a hydrogen atom. And therefore, removal of hydrogen is equivalent to oxidation. And just for information, this enzyme PDH or pyruvate dehydrogenase is a multi-enzyme complex which is composed of many subunits joined together to be a big complex. As I mentioned just now, pyruvate dehydrogenase is a multi-enzyme complex, which means it's composed of multiple units such as E1, E2, and E3. So E1 is pyruvate dehydrogenase, which is responsible for the oxidative decarboxylation of pyruvate into a 2-carbon acetyl unit, while E2 dihydrolipoyl transacetylase will transfer the acetyl group to a coenzyme A, forming the acetyl coenzyme A, while E3 dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase will help to regenerate the oxidized lipoamide such as FAD and NAD positive, which are responsible for the redox balance of the whole reaction. So for this enzyme to function optimally, it will require some vitamins, which are the core enzymes, such as vitamin B1, B2 or riboflavin, B3 or niacin, because they act as the precursors to make these core enzymes like thiamine, pyrophosphate, FADH2, NADH. They act as electron carrier for the reaction. So remember, metabolism is about releasing energy from the food molecule by transferring the high energy electrons to these electron carriers. If you look at the label of any food product, you'll always see that vitamins B are associated with energy and metabolism, such as energy release, the oxidation of food molecule for energy production, and so on. And now you know why. Because vitamin B are the core enzymes required in the metabolism of pyruvate and other substrate as well. Now let's come back to the oxidative decarboxylation of pyruvate with more details. So from this diagram, you can see that the coenzyme thiamine pyrophosphate will release its phosphate group to power the whole reaction. And then FAD will receive electrons as well as 2 protons from the pyruvate to form FADH2. And then subsequently, the hydrogen and electrons are transferred to NAD positive, forming NADH. So these are core enzymes and they are electron transporters as well. So with this process, the 3-carbon pyruvate is converted into the 2-carbon acetyl coenzyme A, and you have got a production of a single carbon dioxide molecule. Okay, thiamine or thymine is vitamin B1, and they are found in grain hulls and meat. But the problem is we don't really eat the hulls, but the polished rice. As a result, in certain areas where people do not eat meat, they might acquire deficiency in vitamin B1, which can cause beriberi. So beriberi is characterized by the loss of appetite because our bodies fail to digest the food molecule due to the lack of this coenzyme thymine B1. And you will feel lassitude, which means extreme fatigue, numbness of limbs and extremities as your nerves are lacking in energy, and eventually atrophy or the wasting away of tissues due to the loss of movement. So, showing here is how a person with beriberi looks like. So what do you think? Are these symptoms reversible? Well, yes, with good care and good nutrients, but the permanent damage done to the organ will always be there. While another example of vitamin B1 deficiency is known as the Wernicke-Korsakoff encephalopathy, which affects only the alcoholics. Okay, we have talked about the first possible fate of pyruvate, which is to feed into the citric acid cycle. Now, however, when the ATP levels or when the energy levels are really high inside the cell, pyruvate can be converted into a more efficient storage molecule, which is fatty acids. So here is the second possible fate of pyruvate, and we'll discuss these in more details when we talk about fats metabolism. And for children and teenagers who are actively growing, some pyruvates can be converted into amino acids, which are the building blocks for proteins. And of course, we're talking about the non-essential amino acids because we cannot synthesize any of the essential amino acids, which must be ingested through our diet. And last but not least, pyruvate can be converted into lactic acid when there is no oxygen or under an anaerobic condition. If you can remember, in step 6 of glycolysis, G3P is converted into 1,3-BPG, and this process requires NAD positive as a coenzyme. But the problem is, we only have very limited amount of NAD positive in the cell, and this means that NAD positive must be regenerated. And there are two ways by which NAD positive can be regenerated. One is by the conversion of NADH back into NAD positive directly in the presence of oxygen, while a second method is to convert pyruvate into lactic acid in the absence of oxygen because NAD positive will be produced and regenerated as a side product. Okay, here is the second mechanism by which you can regenerate NAD positive, which is by converting pyruvate into the lactic acid. So for this reaction to happen, it must be under an anaerobic condition, which means there is no oxygen. And what happens here is that NADH will donate a hydrogen atom to the pyruvate to form a lactic acid molecule. And along with this reaction, you have the reoxidation of NADH back into NAD positive. So again, this will only happen when there is no oxygen, such as during a very heavy physical exercise. But due to the accumulation of the lactic acid, you can feel the burning sensation in your muscle. And when there's too much lactic acid, it causes a drop of pH, and eventually that will inhibit glycolysis, as low pH can inhibit glycolysis. So when you encounter this low pH, you also encounter something like cramps and spasms in your muscles, which act as a warning sign for you to slow down and to take a rest. So by doing that, you will allow oxygen to come in so that all this lactic acid can be removed by oxidation. And showing here is the third strategy to regenerate NAD positive, and this happens in yeast and some bacteria. So this process is known as ethanol fermentation. So by converting pyruvate into ethanol, this process will regenerate NAD positive. And in fact, we have been using this process of alcoholic fermentation for thousands of years in the making of wine and beers. Again, the importance of this process is to regenerate NAD positive so that glycolysis can happen inside the cell. Okay, we've talked about different fates of pyruvate, but our focus today is about the citric acid cycle, which is a process that will generate even more energy from the sugar molecule. And remember, when we say energy from metabolism, it is always about the high energy electrons from the breaking down of food molecule, and how do we capture and harness this energy to make even more ATPs.